yet?
We're
Oh, you're
talking.
just talking, okay. Are you,
You
you've
know of
hit
any
record?
coincidences
Okay.
in connection with this incident that,
Can't think of any.
you know, there's been so many of them, like Robert Patrick, his birthday is on the anniversary of the incident. And it turned out that he was actually related to Mike, the guy he was playing in the movie, on two sides of the family. And this last week, I took Cliff, my oldest boy, with me up to Seattle, and he wanted to visit the grave of Bruce Lee, because Bruce's son Brandon was killed on a Paramount set while I was doing the media tour for Paramount, and they got the news. I was right there when they got the news. But so Bruce and Brandon are buried there together. But Cliff is a black belt in Taekwondo,
Oh,
and he's competed internationally. And so, you know, he wanted to go to the grave. And right when I got home, I went over to the thrift store, and there was this Bruce Lee video. I'd never seen one there before in all this time. But Bruce Lee and James Garner were in a movie together called Marlin. And coincidentally, that was the name of the publishing company. We're having a little warm-up conversation here.
That's good, that's
Okay,
good.
I'll shut up.
Well, you know, whenever. I'm just respectful of Mr.
that's
Gillespie's time.
the only
I thought he was
coincidence,
enjoying this.
Travis, I might tell you that where they filmed that movie up there, my nephew was the one that furnished that carryall.
Oh, wow.
He was working for a scrap dealer, cars and stuff, and he sent lots of pictures of all of it. He was on site. In fact, I think he was an extra somewhere in the bar scene.
Wow. A lot of coincidences. I think there was a relative of Sank Flakes was turned up there. Matter of fact, I had a couple of cousins that were living right there
Yeah.
where they were filming.
So we'd like to know if you've had your own UFO experience. And when you answer your questions, you're going to be looking right at Travis so that I can be checking cameras and running around, so just pretend I'm not here. But
All right.
we had heard, or I guess I learned through Travis, that when you showed up at the truck to talk to the boys, you'd actually had your own experience seeing some unusual stuff, and you didn't completely discount it. You didn't disrespect the men, is what I remember. And I'm curious if you're willing to share about your years, if you've seen unusual things. And pretend Travis asked that question.
Because I wasn't going to ask that one. But,
Whenever you want to answer is fine.
Well, I can't remember the date. It's probably been close to 50 years ago now. I was coming home from Shola one evening, and just this side of the 14-mile hill, about 14 miles south of Holbrook, me and there was two cars coming together because I'd gone up there to pick up a friend of mine who was too drunk to drive home. So I took his niece with me to drive the car back, and as we topped over 14-mile hill coming to Holbrook, all of a sudden the sky just lit up bright as could be and scared this girl so bad she ran off the road. And so we stopped and checked everything's all right, so we got back on the road and headed on to Holbrook, and this light followed us for a little ways and then quit. So I got into Holbrook, and then I thought, well, I'm going to go back out there and look. And so I turned around, went back out there, and the light became visible. The closer I got to that 14-mile summit, the light brightened up again, and I never could see an object where the light was coming from. It was just like daylight outside, and and this was probably at midnight. And so I would go past that spot and look in my rearview mirror, and the light would disappear. But if I drove back north again, the light was there. And this went on for 15 or 20 minutes, just testing it. Finally, I came on home and said nothing about it.
Yeah, probably a good choice. When you first got the call on November 5th, did they just tell you missing persons, or did they actually say that there was a sighting?
I think they indicated we've lost one of our cutters or something to that effect. It didn't come directly to me. It came to a deputy sheriff in Heber by the name of Chuck Ellison, who called me on the phone, and then he gave me a little more detail on it about you guys coming in from the woods and something got your attention.
Okay. A lot's made by some of the crew that you were asked about whether it looked like the crew had been drinking or partying or something. Do you remember thinking very much about that?
Yes, I remember that there was no visible signs of any of that type of activity among the crew that I visited with and talked to.
During this search, were there any, some of the crew have reported that, some of the posse were sort of questioning them as they made the search. Did you give them any instructions to do that, or was they just the course of their job?
Well, I'm sure that we probably instructed them to, if they were able to find out any information that some crime or some physical thing had happened to you, to let me know about it. I think it was just kind of a standard thing that they do when they're on a search.
Was that under your direction, or was that under someone else's? Were you the chief person?
I was a sheriff at the time,
Yes, of course.
and I was on site.
So you were directing how maybe these little group interrogations
Well,
were happening?
myself, my chief deputy, and I'm sure Chuck Ellison was there too, who knew the country somewhat. And some of the posse members were also familiar with the country, so they kind of split up in different directions and for searching.
Now, I'm just going to ask us just to take a moment or two of quiet. Because we have this sound,
Yeah, I was hearing that.
I can cancel it, but I need to just have a moment of silence where we only hear that sound. Then I can match it with a counseling sound and take it out.
I might tell you that there's about 80 trains a day go through Holbrook, both directions, east and west. So the train noise, under certain circumstances,
So this sounds like a work crew or something.
well,
But it is fading.
it could even be trucks on the highway.
Sounds too consistent to me.
That's an air compressor for the drilling,
Yeah,
that's what that is.
yeah. We'll just wait, we'll just take another minute or two of silence. Perfect, that should be enough.
In the weeks before the incident, there had been something in the news about cattle mutilations. Were you aware of any of that in the area?
I was aware, however, we did not have any of those incidents in Navajo County, but our neighboring county, Apache County, I think there was 2 or 3 incidents in that county, as well as a little further to the south, maybe Greenlee County, And I remember hearing reports that came over the radio or through the back then the teletype, letting us be aware that these things were going on.
Okay, well, because that was prompted some conversations on the job concerning UFOs, and I just wanted to verify that, that these news reports had happened. During the search, you had someone volunteer to take Geiger counter readings. Did you request that, or did they come to you?
No, I think those that had equipment like that I think they came to us.
Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't really be certain of who they were or what was the process in gathering the searchers together? Who said, okay, you're a searcher, who wasn't?
Well, as far as the Navajo County Sheriff's Office was concerned, it was either the deputy sheriffs or a group or members of the sheriff's posse. Others hearing about it from some source, in days following, showed up, and I'm sure each one of them identified themselves to me or to my chief deputy or some law enforcement officer that was on site.
Wasn't there also a White Mountain search and rescue team?
White Mountain, yes, from Pine Top area, and there was undoubtedly some of those there also.
Yeah, but how large was the search party at the largest?
I'm guessing probably people on horseback or vehicles. There was probably 35 or 40 people.
Were you present when the tracking dogs were attempted?
Yes, I think we had made contact with the Arizona State Prison. A fellow by the name of, last name of Cordova was the dog handler from Arizona State Prison. And I'm not sure if he came on site or some assistant of his brought some dogs on site and started from the point where it had been pointed out as where the incident occurred. And
they were unable to pick up?
Never picked up any scent.
Okay. Well, that's quite interesting.
I'm wondering how many days the dogs were used. Was it just one day?
I think just one day, or part of a day. They let them work the area around the site out a radius, probably a couple 100 yards for scent, and we're not successful in finding anything.
Some reports said that there was more than one helicopter. Some said that there were also regular small planes involved in the aerial search.
It's been so long ago, I don't actually remember a helicopter. I do remember they had some fixed aircraft just flying low over. Probably they were local people around Holbrook or Shoal.
Well, in a previous interview, you did mention one helicopter, so that would have to be at least that. And my brother Dwayne actually rode on that helicopter, so I was just can't ask him anymore since he's no longer with us. But on the day of the polygraph, who was it that? Whose idea was it? Was it you brought the lie detector expert in?
Yes, from Cy Gilson, who is in my opinion, was pretty well known and respected as a polygraph examiner. We had used him on other matters, criminal matters and stuff, and always with good results and positive results that we were looking for. And so I contacted him and asked him if he would devote some time to it, and he did. He made arrangements to come to Holbrook as soon as, I think it was within a few days, and interviewed the 4 or 5 individuals. there may have been conversation, I'm sure there was conversations between the law enforcement and the guys to see if they would be willing. Whether they suggested a polygraph or not, I don't know. I don't recall it. But it could have been either way.
Well, a number of skeptical individuals tried to interject themselves into the matter, and one in particular wrote letters to you and to the local media. It seemed to kind of try to corner you into prosecuting the crew, Philip Class. And you gave a press conference in response to that, you and the county attorney. Do you have any recollections of that?
Well, in the beginning, when you were not found, we suspected that some foul play may have occurred. Certainly we started looking at everybody else that was there as potential suspects in some sort of foul play. And as part of the polygraph examination, there was question posed to determine if any foul play had occurred. And because if there had been some foul play, we certainly would have requested a prosecution through the county attorney's office.
Do you think had the crew failed questions concerning harming me, that they would probably have been arrested that day?
No, probably not. We probably would have gone further because would have needed additional evidence, like a body or some physical evidence of blood, something to link some of them or all of them to foul play. So it would have been a longer investigation to do that.
Well, failed tests in regard to harming me probably would have really intensified your investigation, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I want to go back to Phil Class and ask if he in fact phoned you or called you. I mean, he's no longer
I know he
living
did.
anymore. And pretty much most of us in this genre have come to the understanding that he was a real deliberate debunker who looked to,
Use some rather dishonest tactics.
And
Well,
I'm just wondering what your experience was.
You know, I can't say that he used dishonest tactics. I had so many people calling me from purporting to be investigators of this company or that company or organization that, I said, I can't tell you anything. I don't have anything. And a lot of them volunteered to come out and do their own investigation. I said, that's up to you.
Well, the youngest man on the crew was offered $10,000 by this guy to come up with something that would discredit the incident. And this offer was carried by Deputy Jim Click there in Taylor. Were you ever informed any of the details of that?
That's the first I had ever heard this.
Well, I put it in my book in 1977, and no one came forward to say anything to the contrary. And it would have been very easy for Mr. Class to go to Officer Click and say, I never offered such a bribe, did I? And he never did that. As a matter of fact, Steve reports that when he changed his name and moved to Texas just to get away from this,
This Class? Or,
Class followed him, found him in Texas, and went down there, took him out to dinner, and repeated this $10,000 offer. I recently ran into Jim Click's son at the post office, and he recalls all of those incidents.
well, I think during that period of time, Jim Click was the town marshal,
Okay.
I think in Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't, I think he'd have been a deputy sheriff at the time.
Well, yeah, he was a Taylor
yeah, Taylor town marshal, and so, but like I said, that's the first I'd heard of that.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of pressure to accept this $10,000 offer, which is definitely not the sort of tactic you would expect in an objective investigator.
And you don't remember the press conference you held after Travis was I think it was after Travis was returned. It was maybe 2 weeks.
Yeah, with County Attorney Bob Hall.
Do you remember that at all? I think the purpose of that was to let the media know that there was no reason to suspect foul play. What we're looking to establish in this film is the validity of the event that happened and the honesty of Travis and the integrity of Travis. It's kind of about his life and his experience.
Well, that certainly could have happened because at the press conference, if we had a press conference, it probably would have been in the form of writing or a teletype or a telephone call, because I don't think we called a press conference where a bunch of press come here to do that. I think we just disseminated the information by whatever source, radio perhaps, and of that type of nature. So I think it was probably in the county attorney and sheriff's office together presented something of that nature.
Now, I have a question about, I have a friend who worked for the fire department for a long time in Baltimore, and on his retirement, and he also was a UFO experiencer. He had a major sighting himself. When he retired, the fire chief brought him a section of the fire chief manual that has a whole protocol on what to do in the event of a UFO event or a crashed event, protocols to follow, agencies you're required to notify, and things like this. Did you have to follow certain protocols because there was a possible UFO event involved?
We did not. We did not have any type of a written policy or verbal policy even. Any incident like that would be just investigated at the source and whatever direction it took.
So, did any federal agency come to you asking details of the investigation or copies of your reports or anything?
None that I recall. I think that we did have information that some of these other volunteer organizations had requested some federal investigation, but that I recall they never got involved. Except I'm sure there was a contact made with probably the Federal Aeronautics Administration to see if they had any activity of any kind by manned aircraft or any reports of anything other than manned aircraft in that immediate area. And as I recall, it was nothing on the records that they disclosed.
But if there was a federal inquiry, you probably wouldn't be able to tell us anyway.
Well, that's true too.
I'm interested in what you think really happened. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, first, I would like to say, you've seen the Paranormal Witness episode. Did seeing the testimony of these men after all these years, I keep feeling like I'm in your way.
It's just the back of your head I'm picking up on camera.
After seeing the testimony of these men after all these years, did that in any way affect your estimation of...
Well, I think all of these people after so many years, including myself, probably didn't recall everything just exactly like it may have happened. You know, our memory fades. Sure. And so when I watched that episode on my computer, I watched it, and you know, I think people were telling the way they remembered it at that
We
today's
have to
time.
separate the testimony of the men from the reenactment because, you know, we really had no connection to that. I was not with any of the other people who were interviewed, and they were all in different states even. And the reenactment was done by people I never even met. So they may have, you know, got wrong impressions and, you know, represented things not quite exactly the way it was. You know, it was the most accurate, in my estimation, the most informative of dozens that have been done in the last 38 years. But, of course, it's not perfect. You know, it gave the impression that the craft started spinning, which it never did. It was always just, you know, same side towards us as it flew. Little things like that, but, you know, there was other things where they took care to get it better than the movie got it. You know, they had us in a 1965 International crew cab instead of a Dodge like they used in the movie. So, just on the basis of the men talking about their experience, does that to you seem like what Copeland said? Guys that are just play acting?
What did Copeland say?
He said, well, I thought they were just play acting from the night he came there.
Oh.
You know, and, you know, from what I, you know, have understood about that night, that they were pretty, you know.
Well, you know, Ken Copeland was always has been a down-to-earth realist type individual. And so something of this nature probably would not really impress him too much.
Well, based on that remark, I would say he doesn't have a real good intuitive sense of judging people's character. You definitely seem to have the ability to read people with your experience and whatnot. What is your impression? Your personal contact with the men?
With these individuals?
Yeah.
Well, like I said a while ago, I did not notice or did not observe any type of thing that would indicate they've been drinking or using drugs or anything like that. There was one or two that seemed to be visibly upset, scared, whatever terminology you might want to use, and were concerned of what was going on. But just a couple of or 3 times maybe I visited with him, I think that they all were trying to tell the truth about everything.
Well, that was James Garner's impression, you know. In his role in the movie was the skeptic, but in off-camera, you know, media interviews, he said he believed us. But, you know, I use the example I was on the Kardashians. I don't know if you saw that. But the girls reported a sighting. And so they wanted to go on a vacation to investigate Area 51. So we met them up there, and Bruce Jenner had the role of the skeptic in the show. Well, afterwards, I got all this email just slamming Bruce Jenner. And I'm sure he thought that was the most popular point of view. Like Copeland would think, well, this is what most people believe. The truth is, nowadays, you know, when people see Copeland say that on that film, I can hear the audience snorting in you know, total disgust because it doesn't seem to ring with what else they know about the case.
I don't think I could comment on that view of the thing.
Not somebody else.
Well, I'm just basing this on surveys. You know that you know it's much more common for people to believe in the reality of life on other worlds and the possibility that they could come here than say in 1975.
Well, back in 75 in those years, there had been a few other incidents reported around the country not necessarily Arizona, but of situations similar. And so I think it was kind of a talking point for people. And I think probably then more so than it is today. You don't hear about any newer situations or incidents that's happening in the world, at least in the United States. In some of the European countries, occasionally I do read something about a similar incident.
Overall, in your career, was this one of the more bizarre incidences? You know, if you were going to sum up your career, how would you put this, Travis's incident?
Most definitely was. Like my wife mentioned earlier, I felt like I had telephones growing out of my ears. I literally sometimes would be on 2 telephones at the same time because I had phone calls from all over the world. I had news media from all over the world calling and wanted facts, and basically we all told them the same thing, that we're investigating and didn't have any final results.
Did you experience ridicule yourself, as many of us do who come forward with a sighting?
I don't recall ever picking up any of that type of rumor or anything. That I think there was more curiosity. There was a lot of people locally in this area, that acquaintances that I knew, and would make comments or question, but nothing in the form of ridicule, I don't believe.
But it's still a humorous take on the subject, or more serious?
Well, I think there has been some humorous comments by different people, like one that I kind of recall, and I can't recall who made it, was some individual in Snowflake said, well, if this was true and they were looking for a subject to examine, they would have probably picked somebody other than Travis.
Yeah,
that type. I don't know who it was that said
I
it.
do, but he apologized for that. He's trying to be funny.
Yeah.
I did want to ask you another question about, and I'm trying to think the best way to word it, just about Travis's character, because the focus of this film is about what happened to him and throughout his life. And you got to know Travis, certainly. I don't know how well you knew him before this event, but
Well, I didn't actually.
you didn't know him at all. Would you like to make any statements for the viewing people who will see this film about Travis's character and what you've come to know about Travis? I know we've got some sound.
Well, I think Travis has stood up under a lot of criticism, whether due criticism or undue criticism. I think he's survived it, which I think is an admirable thing for anyone to live through the whole picture of the thing and still be able to function in an appropriate manner in life. Now, I'd like to add something here. I don't want to put any rain on the story that you're working on. One of the guys ended up in prison. He was sentenced from Maricopa County, the state prison in Florence. And I can't remember the name, but it may have been
It was Alan Dallas.
Alan Dallas. Okay. Calls me on the telephone several years after this happened. called me on the phone and said he was in prison down in Florence. And I said, "What are you there for?" And he said, "Burglary or something." He said, "I was sentenced out of Maricopa County doing 5 to 7 or something." He said, "Do you want to know the true story about Travis Walton?" I said, "Well, yeah, if there's a different story, I'd love to hear it. If you'll get me out of prison, I'll tell you the truth of the whole thing." And I said, "I can't get you out of prison." "Oh, yeah, you can. You're the sheriff." I said, "It's a completely different county. I have no authority of any kind with courts or the prison, period. I can't." I said, "I'd be happy to come down there and interview you." He said, he said, "No, I won't talk to you unless you guarantee me you're going to get out of prison." I said, "Have a good time." And that was the end of it.
Well, so he was going to try to sell us down the river to get himself out of trouble.
Well,
but
certainly.
you know, he was tested by Cy Gilson later, and he was the one who got the inconclusive during the first test, and he passed with flying colors when he was retested. So I guess he kind of had a change of heart about trying to barter his way out of prison. But I guess you're familiar with that sort of jailhouse snitch sort of thing, where people will make up stories to get themselves a break with law enforcement.
There's been lots of incidents of that type. If it'll do them cut their time or get them out, they'll fabricate a lot of things.
And he was afraid of the law in the beginning, wasn't he? Because
Yeah, he
he was afraid to call the police.
he didn't even want it reported. But Dr. Harder, who performed the hypnosis on me, made the point in the media back then that if you had 6 people coming forward that had said they saw Alan, say, kill Travis, people wouldn't have any trouble believing that. But when they testify that they saw a UFO, then there's still questions. That's without polygraph test. At the time that the tests were completed on 6 of us, the president of the American Polygraph Association said that sure, it's only 97% accurate, but when you have 6 people passing tests on the same issue, the odds are 1,000,000 to 1 of there being any kind of an error involved. Well, now there's 16 passed tests. I've passed 5 from 3 different examiners, all of them with many years of law enforcement experience. The most recent being with, an examiner of the highest credentials, even doing work for the U.S. Marshals. And yet, it's never enough.
Well, back in those early 70s, there were not too many polygraph examiners in the state of Arizona. And local law enforcement, small agencies, depended upon either Phoenix Police Department or Tucson Police Department or DPS, Arizona Highway Patrol, to furnish that type of expertise that we didn't have locally. So polygraph examiners were scarce, but they were also used a lot. So they got a lot of experience and lots of testimony in courts classified as experts.
And that's also the case with my last examiner. I went to the state of New Mexico because results are allowed in court there. And so it's very highly regulated, and the standards are much more stringent. And so, like I said, and of course this was more recent years, and the equipment was much more sophisticated and refined. They had a computer scoring along with and it was much more complex than even Cy Gilson's work in '93. But this incident really happened, and sometimes I'm just totally amazed that people can maintain the skepticism that they have.
Well, there's just looking at people, taking back the case that you set 6 months on. No matter what the jury said in that case, there is millions of people that watched all that would be the opposite of what that jury said.
Destroyed our faith in the legal system.
That's exactly right. There's been several since then that have done the same thing, you know. The young lady down in Alabama on the child, I think, and stuff. So it's going to take a lot of years, I think, to get faith back in the legal system and court system in the United States.
True.
I
can understand why Congress would want to limit rather than refine polygraph, because they're all a bunch of liars.
Well, that's true. You mentioned New Mexico. I have a grandson that's a sergeant with the police department in Farmington, New Mexico. Just completed a 3-month training on polygraph examiners I think he was in Austin, Texas for 3 months. And he had, I don't know how many cases waiting for him when he got back to work, starting off with applicants for police work in the sheriff's office, police departments in that area. And he said, and eventually he'll be getting into criminal activities and stuff. And he said, then I will get the opportunity to testify in court, because he said, like you, New Mexico does allow it.
And other states do too. So, you know, it's kind of a misconception in the public that they think, well, polygraph isn't even recognized in court. No, it's not really true.
Yeah, in Arizona, that's correct. But so it has been in Arizona. Way back, I think it was allowed. And some Supreme Court decision come along that.
But it's still a very important tool of law.
Oh, it's a tool it's an investigative tool. Definitely.
All right, I'm just gonna take a peek at this. I think we've covered everything. If there's anything else you wanna ask or anything you would really like to
I'll probably
add.
think of several after we're done.
That's always the
Oh, well,
case.
everybody, they
I
will.
tried to think as much as I could. I'm wondering if you have any photos or any film of you on television during this period of time. Did you collect any of that stuff? Or?
Lots of newspaper articles.
You
I
have a
would have
bunch
thought,
of them?
you know, VCRs weren't that common in
No.
homes, but
No, they weren't.
They weren't. No. You know, you didn't, even if it was a interview on tape of some kind, they only lasted so long.
Right.
For example, the night I came to Phoenix to see you, you were recorded,
okay.
and by a couple of deputy sheriffs sitting down the street. You may have been aware, and you may not have been aware. That tape, I preserved it, had it for years and years, and then all of a sudden it disappeared out of my desk. I had it locked up in my desk at the sheriff's office. And I don't know who had access to my desk, but somebody, I don't know if they knew what it was or if they were just looking for a blank tape or to use, but anyway, it disappeared and never have found it.
Well, that's disappointing. You know, there's been a lot of disappearing files in connection to this. APRO said that their file on my case was over a foot thick. That disappeared about the time we started looking into it, you know, when Paramount made the movie. We even came to the sheriff's department, you know, after you went over to sheriff, and they said, sure, you can have a copy of the file. It's a closed file. Come back tomorrow. And then they said, we can't find it.
Well, no, I don't think those disappeared. Well, those, I'll tell you, I know what happened to those. When Sheriff Butler came into office. Let's see, between Glenn Flake was the sheriff right after I retired. Then Gary Butler became the sheriff, and for whatever reason, he went in there and all the old files that were there, he took them out and had the custodian of the building maintenance supervisor or superintendent dig a huge hole back up behind the county somewhere and set it afire. Which because the other cases I had wanted, somebody had a need for them. And
Yeah, there could be something that could link up to some other crime at a later date. That could
oh
be
yeah,
important.
I have a, I guess maybe could be a hoarder or something, but I save paperwork.
Well, records are one thing you should hoard.
Yep.
So you may have some newspaper articles that maybe even Travis doesn't?
I have a lot of them. Now it would take me, I've got them probably stored in some boxes in my closet, and I would have no objection when I have some time to dig them out, make contact with him and let him review them all, copy them, or whatever he wanted to do.
Well, I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank you for your help in locating Dwayne Smith. We were able to locate him because of that. I had a friend who was an ex-police officer in Oklahoma who was able to track him down. I had a conversation with him on the phone, several, and then I just got word last week that he's had a heart attack and died.
Oh.
So that's the second, Alan
Second.
Dallas, and then him.
I heard that Alan died too, but I didn't
Yeah,
know.
it was a heart attack also. But, so I feel fortunate that I was able to record an interview with Dwayne Smith and his memories.
I need to go to the little boys' room.
No problem. You know what? I think we're done.
Oh, all
I
right.
think we're done. So we'll let you do that, and we'll
right.
start to pack up.
Anybody needs to use a bathroom, just off the kitchen here.
All right,
Help
thank you.
yourself.
Thank you. We're so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's I've got some cold water in the refrigerator bottles.
Oh, you're very kind. I don't even know if we need it. You know, I mean, I see you have little bottles right here. We brought water with us.
Okay.